Henry VII. The Tudors came to the throne after the Battle of Bosworth, which in turn was the last significant battle in the Wars of the Roses. The Battle of Bosworth was a Tudor victory after Henry Tudor defeated King Richard III of England. A lot of nobles believed that Henry's claim to the throne was weak at best, as the only link he had was the Lancastrian branch through his mother's side. His father was the bastard half-brother of the old king, King Henry VI, who was deposed, but not once, but twice, by Edward IV from the House of York. On the day of battle, Henry's army was close to defeat. However, a third army from the Stanley brothers was intercepted onto Henry's side, thus winning him the crown and the disputed end to the Wars of the Roses. After winning the crown, Henry VII changed the date of his ascension to the throne to the day before the Battle of Bosworth. Parliament accepted this, and thus officially Henry's reign started on the 21st of August 1485, making everyone on Richard III's side a traitor, and that meant they had committed treason against their king. One of Henry's claims to the throne was that nobles turned to his side, and he would marry the Princess Elizabeth of York, the late King Edward IV's daughter, and Richard III's niece. A child from both himself and Elizabeth would be that both of the warring houses and bring peace to England. Elizabeth gave birth to her son Arthur Tudor in September 1486 during Henry's reign. He only met with Parliament 7 times, which were to raise money in case of war. Henry and Elizabeth went on to have 3 more surviving children, Margaret, Henry, and Mary. In 1489, the Treaty of Medina del Campo was signed by both England and Spain to have a marriage between the heir to the English throne, Arthur Tudor, and the Spanish princess, Catherine of Aragon. The idea behind the treaty was to stop the growing threat of France and other European powers opposed to both Spain and England. On the 14th of November 1501, the two married at St. Paul's Cathedral in London. Soon after the wedding, Arthur and Catherine left for the Welsh marshes to settle in their new home of Ludlow Castle and to govern Wales, as they were now the Prince and Princess of Wales. Sadly, on the 4th of April 1502, Arthur suddenly died after the Prince and Princess of Wales became ill with a mysterious illness. The news reached London and to the king, who was devastated. His youngest son became heir to the throne, little Henry. Later, in 1502, the Treaty of Perpetual Peace between England and Scotland was both signed by King Henry VII of England and James IV of Scotland. The treaty was to promise the hand of Margaret Tudor to James IV of Scotland. However, the peace did not last. Henry has been said to have been a paranoid in his reign, which makes sense as there were a lot of numerous rebellions against him. The 1486 Laval Rising, the 1487 Lambeth and Simnel and Earl of Lincoln Rising, the 1489 Yorkshire Rising, the 1495 Perkin Warbeck Rising. Again in the following year, 1496 Perkin Warbeck Scottish Invasion. The 1497 was the first Cornish Rising, and later that year the second Cornish Rising alongside Perkin Warbeck. During the Henry VII's reign, England was still strongly Catholic, and this was intensified by the union of Arthur Tudor and Catherine of Aragon. England did see some humanist ideas, however, from the likes of Erasmus. However, England was still very conservative. In 1503, Elizabeth of York, the Queen Consort of England, died on the 11th of February after a brutal birth of her last child, Catherine. Sadly, Catherine died a few days after the birth. It was said Henry deeply mourned his wife and wept tears when he heard the news. His health also declined after this point. His heir Arthur had died, his beloved wife Elizabeth had died, and now all of England's hopes were pressured onto his last surviving son, Henry. Henry was immediately tutored the way his late brother had been. The king had considered marrying Catherine of Aragon himself. However, her father, King Ferdinand II of Aragon, said no. On the 21st of April, 1509, the King of England died, making his only living son King of England. The new King Henry is known today as Henry VIII, and on the 11th of June that year, Henry and Catherine married, and later that month, Henry led his new wife and queen to their joint coronation. This was the beginning of the reign of England's most infamous king, Henry VIII.